Oh, hello, 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 hello. Yes, we are live. In the Car with Star is back. The playoffs for the National Hockey League are here, and they start tonight. We are ready to go. Welcome, welcome, welcome back to the channel. It feels like it's been a minute. I have fully recovered. I am healthier, fatter, but healthier, and that's the good thing. The golf season, my friends, is weeks away locally. For some of you already, the public warriors in my life are already out there. I'm sure Golf International on the Lacole border has been thriving, and certainly the weather locally over over this past weekend with highs of 24, 25. You're in the sun, feels like 25 degrees, feels like 32 degrees, and summer kicked off this weekend here in La Belle Province, and we are ready for the start of the NHL playoffs, my friend, that begin tonight on four different fronts. It's the Islanders and Carolina Hurricanes, and then we'll have the Florida Panthers and Boston Bruins. You got the Minnesota Wild playing, and the late game, the LA Kings taking on the Edmonton Oilers. I've got some picks. I've got some thoughts on the NHL playoffs, and for the first time in a little bit, I'm actually really excited for the start of these playoffs because for the first time since the Montreal Canadiens run to the Stanley Cup final from a few seasons ago, I'm actually cheering for a team. I'm actually lending my support to the Edmonton Oilers. It's kind of weird, and I don't even know how I can explain this to you. But since I was a kid, hockey's been my go-to game. The Canadiens are my go-to team. And for whatever reason, the Edmonton Oilers from the late 80s, early 90s have kind of been my secret favorite team, not named the Montreal Canadiens. And I was never a Gretzky guy. Like I'm 44 years old. I saw Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and Steve Yzerman. Those were the big three guys from my childhood. And Gretzky, to be honest with you, brought up the rear. In terms of Mario, Yzerman, Gretzky, 99 was kind of my least favorite dominant player. I was always a Mario guy. Still to this day, you ask me the best hockey player I've ever seen, and my answer is going to be Mario Lemieux. So it's not like my allegiance to the Edmonton Oilers came from Mark Messier or came from Wayne Gretzky or Grant Fuhr or the dynasty era Edmonton Oilers that were ringing up Stanley Cups every single year. I just always enjoyed. I was a Bill Ranford guy. I always liked Andy Moog. I think at the beginning of my fandom as a hockey fan, the goaltender was always my favorite position. And Patrick Waugh was my favorite player as a Montreal Canadian and still is to this day. So I've always been attracted to goaltenders. Another aspect of me being a hockey fan that I can't understand. Why do I like goaltenders as much as I do? The earliest memory I have of a favorite goaltender was Mario Gosselin of the Quebec Nordiques. You remember Mario Gosselin? What about Mike Liut from the Hartford Whalers, right? Reggie Lemelin of the Boston Bruins. These are goaltenders that Reggie Lemelin of the Bruins I despised. Mike Liut I didn't like either. But Mario Gosselin of the Quebec Nordique, I always liked him. I always liked the little guys, Mike Vernon from the Calgary Flames, right? So I've always been kind of drawn to the goaltender position. So Bill Ranford, Andy Moog, these great Edmonton Oilers goaltenders from back in the day. And then obviously Curtis Joseph. That's where I think I really kind of dug in as an Oiler fan. Eric Brewer on defense, Doug Wade up front, little Mike Comrie buzzing around all over the place. I mean, they had I like the speed of the Oilers. I've always been a fan of team toughness. It's one aspect of the Boston Bruins that I've always respected. And, when we talk about seeing dominant teams and traits that dominant teams have, and, we look at those teams and say, well, what can we take from that team and bring it with us and hope that our team can adopt a similar strategy? And the Boston Bruins, understanding that they are the biggest rival of the Montreal Canadiens, their team toughness, that team dynamic was always so enviable. I've always wanted that approach adopted to the Montreal Canadiens, and maybe they'll get there when they look at how the Boston Bruins, with their 135 points and all their wins that they piled up this season, look, all the pressure and all the expectation are all squarely on the Boston Bruins, and my pick to win the Stanley Cup, I'm going to get this out of the way now, are the Edmonton Oilers. I'm going to back the Oilers. If it's not the Boston Bruins in that question that we had some fun with last week, would you take the Bruins to win the Stanley Cup, or would you take the field? We threw this question out there last week, Connor McKenna and yours truly on the morning show on TSN 690. We got over 1,000 replies on our Facebook question. I mean, the math all day, every day. 16 teams make the playoffs. Why would you choose one team when you have 15 to pick from? But that's the pressure. That's what happened when the Boston Bruins kind of rewrote the modern NHL record book with their 135 points and their dominant run. Are the Florida Panthers the team that could plant the seed of doubt? Because that's all it takes. That's all it takes for the Boston Bruins to maybe question whether or not they can actually do this, right? Because, doing all the heavy lifting in the regular season is one thing. But now, where every loss matters and every win matters, and every battle, every puck possession, every timely stop, all of these get exaggerated because they have so much more meaning to them. And look, I mean, the Florida Panthers are the one team that kind of had Boston's number this season. They beat them twice, and Matthew Tkachuk is the type of player, I believe, that is built to excel in the playoffs. That pain in your ass, that thorn in the side, these are the type of players that thrive in this type of atmosphere. So I expect Matthew Tkachuk to be a standout performer. And look, I mean, we're talking about a Florida Panther team that's going with a 30-year-old goaltender named Alex Lyon out of the state of Minnesota. And what does that mean? We've seen goaltenders that have come in and stolen shows and stolen series and gone on to win a Stanley Cup. Hello, Cam Ward, anybody? We've seen this before. Antti Niemi with Chicago. These goaltenders that come out and for whatever reason, turn into impenetrable walls. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. But if the Florida Panthers are hoping to do what nobody expects them to do, and that's upset the best team in hockey this season in the Boston Bruins, it begins with planting seeds of doubt. Just one little morsel that gets the leadership group in Boston to say, oh, whoa, this Alex Lyon guy, we can't beat him. Or the Florida special teams, their power play, they move the puck, we can't predict what they're going to do. Like, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take something special that the Florida Panthers are going to have to do, like Matthew Tkachuk taking a game over, being this power forward pain in the butt that nobody has an answer to. Alex Lyon stealing games, stealing series. If you can begin to plant a seed of doubt in a pressure-packed best of 7 where you cannot lose 4 times, that is how I could see the Boston Bruins getting bounced and getting embarrassed a la Tampa Bay Lightning from many years ago when the Columbus Blue Jackets swept them out of the playoffs. But remember this. Remember when CBJ swept Tampa Bay in that series, the Lightning went on to win the Stanley Cup the very next year. Comments coming in already. Same here. Was a kid during the 2006 run to the finals. Will always love, oh my God, Pisani. Joel Sanderson coming in, talking, if you're just joining us, my secret favorite team outside of the Montreal Canadiens has been the Edmonton Oilers and has been so since the late 80s, early 90s. It has nothing to do really with Wayne Gretzky. And in all honesty, I mean, Connor McDavid might go down as the greatest player to ever wear skates. And I would love to see this kid win a Stanley Cup. It'd be so awesome to see. Steph Howard back in the chat. Nice to have you back, Sean. A lot of people said it was Gretzky's team. It was actually Messier's team. Reggie Lemelin was the first Boston goaltender that beat us in the playoffs in 50 years. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, we're going down memory lane from my childhood as a young hockey fan here in Montreal and watching Mike Liut and Dave Babbage and Kevin Dineen torch the Montreal Canadiens in a playoff series. Mario Gosselin, Goose from the Quebec Nordique, Mike Vernon with the Calgary Flames. Talking about Reggie Lemelin, the impenetrable wall that stoned the Montreal Canadiens from so many years ago. So let's get into it here. I've got some best bets in terms of a series. I'm talking about series picks now for the first round of the NHL playoffs. I have 3 series to me that I feel strongly about, certain picks. And I'll start with the first game that opens up the NHL playoffs for this year, and that's the New York Islanders and Carolina Hurricanes at 7 o'clock. Both of these teams are very evenly matched. They're all about puck possession. They're all about containment. Their PKs aren't great. Their power plays are just kind of okay. They're mirror images, more or less, of each other. I'll tell you that I like this series to go deep. More or less a 7-game series is what I'm saying here, because of the fact that the New York Islanders, I believe, and I put some weight behind this, that the New York Islanders for the better part of 2 weeks have been battle-tested and playing playoff-type hockey. They're the reason that the Pittsburgh Penguins are out and the New York Islanders and Florida Panthers are in. The Islanders went out and took it, and as a result, I kind of think they're a little bit more battle-tested than a Carolina team that is obviously oozing with talent. Injuries, no doubt. Are they gelling at the right time? It's going to be hard to figure out, and while figuring that out in real time as a best-of-7 series goes on. So we're going to take the New York Islanders plus a game and a half in this series. So obviously they can't lose in 4, 5, or 6 games. We like this series ultimately to go 7. The late game tonight sees the Edmonton Oilers at 10 o'clock take on the LA Kings. So if I took a game and a half with the New York Islanders in that series with Carolina, we're going to lay a game and a half with the Edmonton Oilers taking on the Los Angeles Kings game 1 tonight in Edmonton. So in other words, anything that works for us, a 4-game sweep, a 5-game, got to win in 6, can't win in 7 games, obviously. So we're going to lay the Oilers have to win this by 2. So that's kind of what I'm doing at this point. The Oilers may be the best team in the Western Conference. They played unbelievable in the second half of the season. Edmonton ends their season on a 9-game run. They went 14-0-1 in their final 15 games. They got the best player on the planet and an unbelievable supporting cast. And what about Evander Kane? And when Evander Kane, who scored 13 goals in 15 playoff games last year, could be a little bit of an X factor, as I talked about Matthew Tkachuk with the Florida Panthers, in terms of a player that is hardwired to excel in the playoffs. Evander Kane, with the angle that he plays with, his dynamic, another player that I think is built for the playoffs. So I think the Oilers are obviously clicking at the right time. They've been to the playoffs now. They felt the agony of playoff defeats, and it's funny because it was last summer. I had an unbelievable opportunity to play golf in the NHL Coaches and Alumni Tournament, and it was held at the Kanawaki Golf Club because the draft was here in Montreal. So the golf course that I've been a member at for 10 years hosted the NHL Coaches and Alumni, and I was very, very fortunate at the banquet and dinner after our day of golf. I got to sit with Jay Woodcroft, and we shot the shit for like more or less an hour, just him and I, talking about the Oilers, talking about Connor McDavid, what's he like in the room. And I also had a chance to talk to Brett Kulak, the former Canadiens defenseman, and he was telling me that everyone's in awe with Connor McDavid, right? The skill set's undeniable. But there was a point in their second round series where McDavid was talking in the room and literally stood up in his stall and said something along the lines of, "We are not losing this bleeping game. We are not losing this bleeping series." And like all the players and McDavid's teammates in the room were, I don't want to say maybe shocked is the right word, because I guess McDavid is a little bit of a quiet operator and that he does all of his talking on the ice. But for a rare instance, McDavid stood up and said, "The hell with this. We're not losing this game," right? So it tells me that, players go through phases about, making it to the show. Oh, I've made it to the show. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is, I think I could do this. I think I could play well at this level. That's phase 2. Phase 3 is, I know I belong. I know I can do that. And I think Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers are now in phase 3. They have tasted the bitterness of playoff losses and falling short of expectations. And you learn from that, I believe, anyway. And that's why I like the Edmonton Oilers minus a game and a half. So, yes, they have to win this series by 2 games in order for us to cover this. So the Oilers, I've got them in a breeze. I think the Islanders are going to be in a dogfight with the Carolina Hurricanes. We're going to take that series to go the distance. And the Vegas Golden Knights, my other Western Conference series pick, the Winnipeg Jets, your wild card number 2 team, taking on the Vegas Golden Knights. Winnipeg did one thing very well this season, and that was play inconsistent hockey. And after a strong start to the season where the Jets spent some time atop their division in the Central, it was a spiral in the wrong direction moving forward. And obviously, I mean, they did good enough and well enough that they were able to take that second wildcard spot. But they're up against a playoff-tested Vegas Golden Knights team that is catching fire. They caught fire in the second half of their season. They won all three head-to-head matchups against Winnipeg during the regular season. Vegas ended the season with 13 wins in 18 games, 12 wins in their last 15 on home ice. The Golden Knights, the better time at the right time. We like Vegas, just like we like Edmonton, minus a game and a half. And that series, again, 4, 5, or 6 games for us gets the job done. So some of my early leans for some playoff matchups that start tonight. First game up, 7 o'clock. With Islanders and Carolina Hurricanes. Joel Sanderson, Tristan Jarry laying an egg versus Montreal a couple weeks ago after going up 2-0, missing the playoffs by 1 win. Exactly. And what about the Buffalo Sabres? Correct me if I'm wrong. Did the Sabres not miss the playoffs by a singular point? What happened? Anyone remember Michael Pezzetta, Tiger Williams riding his hockey stick, and the Buffalo Sabres on the outside looking in by a single point? Rick Springhetti, McDavid, Draisaitl versus Kopitar and Deneau is fascinating. Elite offensive centers versus elite defensive centers. That's a great breakdown, and that's why we always look to Rick Springhetti for a little bit more insight, seeing the angles that sometimes we miss. And I missed that one. I forgot about Phil Deneau. I'm so glad Rick brought that up in the comments, because we have memories of Phil Deneau making Mitch Marner and particular Austin Matthews more or less irrelevant in that Montreal Canadiens first-round series win over the Toronto Maple Leafs. Obviously, Carey Price with his .940 save percentage against Austin Matthews in that series from a few seasons ago clearly paid dividends. So there you go. Some of my early leans, some of my best bets for the NHL playoffs. Again, the playoffs open up on 4 fronts starting at 7 o'clock tonight. We saw the Montreal Canadiens. Their season came to an end. We know now that they have locked in the 5th spot. They finished 28th overall in the National Hockey League. Still waiting on Cole Caulfield's contract, which I expect to come in the not-too-distant future. It'll be fascinating to see kind of where that comes down. It was also refreshing for me to hear Jeff Gordon speak on Friday as the players cleaned up their locker stalls and got ready for a brand new offseason. When Jeff Gordon talked about the excitement of an offseason, won't they be aggressive? What are the draft plans? What's this team going to do in terms of prospects, guys that they want to graduate? Are they going to look at maybe moving assets and everything else? And, there's been a few days between what they've said and for us to react. And, I always pride myself on being honest with you guys, and I always try to tell it like it is without sugarcoating anything or rose-colored glasses or whatnot. And I know we've spoken together here about the honeymoon phase and the new direction that the organization is headed into, and how we like Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon, and we like Martin St. Louis, obviously, and none of that has changed. As a matter of fact, I'm actually even more optimistic, even more positive, even more willing to extend my belief that in the not-too-distant future, this organization with its front office intact is going to make some waves. And I think you're starting to see it already. I personally, and just my opinion, I don't have any inside information here, I think Pierre-Luc Dubois, it's a matter of months, weeks, months, whatever it is, Pierre-Luc Dubois, I believe, will start the 2023-2024 season as a member of the Montreal Canadiens. And I think what's to come there, if I'm going to predict the future, you know what I think is going to happen? That this is going to be a little bit of a trend and will get better and better and better. That we are going to start to see players of substance want to come to Montreal. Something that I don't believe I have ever said with a serious tone in my lifetime. I really believe the fresh air that's been breathed into the organization is now contagious. So much so that other teams, other players are taking note and maybe picking up the phone and say, you know what, agent, when my contract ends, I want you to call Ken Hughes. I want you to get him on the phone. Let's start a dialogue. Let's see what that conversation looks like, because I like what they're doing in Montreal. That's what I think the future is, and I think it begins with Pierre-Luc Dubois, a guy from here who, by all accounts, is aggressive in his desire to want to be a Montreal Canadien. That's the future. And when you listen to Jeff Gordon on Friday talk to the media about where he sees this team going, you know what the biggest takeaway for me was? It wasn't, and it has nothing to do with their philosophies about prospects and development and or trades in the conservative or aggressive manner. The takeaway for me was that Jeff Gordon wasn't full of shit. That's what it is for me. And, I've spent some time now, on the media side of things, giving opinions about the Canadiens' moves and their front office decisions. And there were times that my bullshit detector was going off 5-alarm style when Marc Bergevin would talk. And Marc Bergevin would try to explain things. And you can't be aggressive. You can't trade for sinners. You want loyalty, buy a dog. There were a lot of cliched hockey speak. And I believe that Marc Bergevin came here with the best of intentions, that he wanted to win a Stanley Cup with Montreal, that he wanted to be the architect to bring a 25th cup to Montreal, right? I believe that. I don't believe Marc Bergevin was a paycheck general manager, just showed up, right? I don't believe that for a second. But I do believe that in almost 10 years of being the manager of the Montreal Canadiens with more or less complete autonomy, that Marc Bergevin despised being second-guessed, and that Marc Bergevin spent a lifetime in professional hockey, and that sometimes Marc Bergevin was offended by people who asked him questions or second-guessed his mythology. And I believe towards the end of Marc Bergevin's tenure that he thought, by his answers, just don't question me. Let me do what I'm doing. I've got this. How dare you? Right? And there were times in those answers to those questions where I thought Marc Bergevin was full of shit. That words were just coming out of his mouth. And that he thought, just trust me. Don't question me. I've got this. Right? And that's not how the media in this market works. And when I hear Jeff Gordon talk and I hear him explain how he wants to manage this team in the seasons to come, I get a very level-headed, straight-line answer where sometimes previous regimes, Bergevin, Pierre Gauthier, and others, that they would zigzag. They would take us on Montreal detours until we got to the point. And sometimes we didn't get to the point till years later. We're like, well, now we know why they were doing that, right? Like, the Montreal Canadiens organization has always been, always past tense, very secretive. My mom was very fond of telling me when I would hear her talking to my grandma or talking to my dad in a whisper tone, like, what were you talking about there? What did you say to grandma? And my mother would look at me and she would be like, Sears doesn't tell Eaton's their business, right? And that's what it reminds me of when I would hear the Montreal Canadiens be so secretive about injuries or related to certain players. I would always have my mom in the back of my head, always in the back of my head, saying that Sears doesn't tell Eaton's their business, meaning that the Montreal Canadiens aren't telling us their business. That's their internal business, And I think the Canadiens have done an about-face. I think the Canadiens have recognized that approach and that attitude in the 21st century doesn't really fly anymore. And that, to be more of an open book organization, which is probably too liberal a term. They're not an open book organization. I think we could say that. But they're a little bit more free in terms of what they release. They're also a little bit more free in how their players are perceived on social media channels, etc. That now the Montreal Canadiens, I believe, are a modernized organization and getting more modern. And that is attractive to young players in the National Hockey League. And so those are the takeaways for me. That's what I heard. That's what I saw on Friday last week when the Montreal Canadiens cleaned out their locker room. And as I said a couple of weeks ago in this space, that yes, I can see a path in which the Montreal Canadiens don't get burned by this absurd run of bad luck with multiple season-ending injuries to so many marquee players. That yes, the Montreal Canadiens with good goaltending, steady goaltending as they got this year from Montembeault and Jake Allen, that they can make a run. They can challenge for a playoff spot, but it'll be fascinating to see what they do this offseason with certain players, with tenure, with contract. Sean Monahan, in 25 games had 17 points. Is there an appetite from you guys to see Sean Monahan back? Jake Allen on Friday said the turning point, the TSN turning point of his team season was when Sean Monahan went down with injury. Can you believe that? That was unbelievable to me. But he's a player on that team. I'm not going to debate Jake Allen on his opinion in regards to the TSN turning point of the season. I was just kind of surprised because Sean Monahan had been sidelined for so long. I honestly forgot about how many points this guy put up in such a short little window. More comments coming in. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's go here. Sean, you never brought up the make the playoffs and anything can happen plan. Maybe more mind-boggling was Jeff Molson bought it for 10 years. I have time for people who are put in positions to have a vision. I imagine a scenario in which Jeff Molson brings in Marc Bergevin to interview for the general manager position. And, I've never been in those type of interviews in my life. Shocker, right? But I've never been in those interviews, so I really don't know how they go. I have a guess as to how I think they go. And it might be okay, Mark, why don't you tell us what our prospect pool looks like, what you think it'll look like, what you want it to look like, and tell us the path to a 25th Stanley Cup. And obviously, Marc Bergevin, with his charming ways and his handsome looks and his witty sense of humor, did an unbelievable job. But I think, part of the problem was also that there was too much trust for too long. To this guy's point here was that you let it go for 9.5 years. That would be a fascinating discussion to have as time moves on. Gordon won 2 lotteries with the Rangers. Just saying. Look, I mean, I don't disagree. And look, New York is an attractive market. New York City is an attractive market. But understand this. Like, I even believe this before, when the Canadiens still had Carey Price in his prime. I always believe that if you show players a team with a legitimate chance at winning a Stanley Cup, regardless of the politics and the taxation issues, I do believe teams will want to play for that club. And when I look at how, the Montreal Canadiens and the organization have evolved, and obviously the golden goose that is Martin St. Louis, I think players look at that and say, you know what? That's a good market. That's a good coach. That's a modern coach who gets it. But look, nothing is perfect. Nothing is perfect. And, to Joel's point here, where the Rangers won 2 lotteries, okay. The Canadiens won the lottery in Juraj Slafkovsky, and guess what? They have an 8.5% chance at landing the number 1 overall pick, too. Like the player that wins the World Series of Poker main event, you know how much luck goes into that, mother? You know how much luck? There's skill, there's strategy, but boy, oh boy, do you need luck. Not everything is just going to be black and white. There are a lot of variables, a lot of intangibles that come into play that you don't always game plan for. The good teams can roll with the punches and roll with them on the fly and are very good at making those transitions. So there's a lot of luck, a lot of skill. Are you good to be lucky or are you lucky to be good? You tell me. Lots of comments coming in. Thank you so much. Here's another one. I'm sending all kinds of Irish luck for the Habs to get the first pick. We have a small chance, but we do have a chance. Just give me a chance, right? Dumb and Dumber, anybody? Is it 1 in 100 or more like 1 in a million? So you're telling me I've got a chance? Oh, yes. You know what? You've got a chance to eat well and fuel up at K-Stop Gas Bar and Depanneur. It's Highway 130 in Ganawage. Beautiful, tasty, freshly made, warm chocolate chip cookies only at K-Stop Gas Bar and Depanneur with their breakfast sandwiches and their daily menu options. You got hot and cold options. You got breakfast sandos. You'll have a BLT for lunch. Tomorrow will be Tuesday. You've got burritos and taco bowls, fresh salads and smoothies, all at K-Stop Gas Bar and Dippener. As Guy Irish knows, he knows the best stop is K-Stop. Ooh, I might use that one. I like that one very much. The best stop is K-Stop. It's Highway 138 in beautiful Ganawage, Quebec. The host site for the Star Classic coming September 11th to the Kanawaki Golf Club. Looking forward to being there. Don't forget Axon Transportation Group. Call them for all your logistical and transportation needs right now. 888-99-AXON. AxonGroup.com is their website. You can trust them that they have the knowledge and the assets to get your freight to its destination on time, on budget, safely and securely, only from Axon. Proudly owned and operated and built right here in Montreal in the South Shore. More information, 888-99-AXON. Find them online at axongroup.com. Proud sponsors of In the Car with Star. Thanks for listening in, everybody, on this rainy Monday morning. We'll be back later this week for another edition of In the Car with Star. You can support me by supporting my sponsors. Don't forget, like and subscribe on our YouTube page, and we've got a lot to do. We've got our golf tournament coming up in September. We've got T-shirts and pickleball gear to give away, so you don't want to miss anything. You hit the notification bell if you're listening on YouTube, or hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platforms like iHeart or Apple or Spotify, because we've got lots of giveaways now that the weather has turned. We're gonna have a lot of fun here in the Car with Star together. So keep it locked right here. We'll be back later this week.